Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology Podcasts with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest today is Arvind Gupta, Managing Director and Founder of IndieBio. So Arvind, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm really glad to talk to you. I know IndieBio is a pretty eminent company. So if you wouldn't mind telling listeners, tell me about IndieBio. What's the premise? How long have you guys been in operation?
Yeah, absolutely. So IndieBio is a venture capital fund that is funded by SOSV, and which I'm a general partner. And so what we do is we fund scientists to become entrepreneurs and solve the world's most pressing problems using biology as a technology. And I came to this premise really over the last 20 years. I started my life my professional life as a genetic engineer, studied genetic engineering in college, and then just realized that the speed of biology did not match the speed of my attention span, or the shortness of my attention span, especially back then. It was just very, very, very slow. And so I went on to do design, industrial design, and worked at a company called IndieBio, where I really learned the tools of using a process to productize technology and to create product market fit and really bring something that is a possibility into a reality. And then took the next step of doing a startup myself. What's that?
No, just saying, okay, I like the fact that you said there's a process to productize things instead of just, invent something and then hope that people will love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great for one-off inventors, but I think if you can create something repeatable and really understand the major points at which things fail and understand the major points at which things succeed, you can up the probability of success for hard tech companies. And in doing so, you really can start to create a vehicle that moves the lever on humanity in a positive way. That was worth really diving into venture capital to do so and really dedicating my life to that change. And so that's really become the purpose of my life, which is to help scientists become entrepreneurs and leaders that can identify how to take their specific insights and turn them into globally impactful, world-changing companies. Great example of that is, in our portfolio is Memphis Meats and Clara Foods and our entire cellular agriculture portfolio. The idea of eating foods which were being produced by cellular factories. It was a foreign concept until about 3 years ago when I started funding them out of IndieBio, and that has changed the conversation about how we produce our food. That's what I mean by it. And so, applying a design process to building these technologies into consumer-facing, person-facing products is exactly what we do at IndieBio.
Well, can you incubate listeners' minds for a few minutes? Tell me about the process and why is it so critical? Where do companies go wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a big part of where companies go wrong is they think that whatever it is that they've come up with is the solution. And they often think that the problem they're looking at is a big problem. And oftentimes it's a product of it's a problem of the times, or it's a product that doesn't really have an audience, and because they've assumed a lot of things about their potential customer that simply aren't true. So I always say this actually for both IndieBio as well as the companies that go in or come through. Really, we focus on the problem more than the solution. And I think the more you focus on the problem, the more you'll understand the right solution. And so the founders that we select need to be flexible, need to be broadly minded, and also have to have the expertise to navigate sort of different ways of solving that problem. That problem will always be extremely large. But oftentimes the entryway is a very precise sort of chink in the armor of that supply chain, let's say, or of a customer's pain point. And then using that as a beachhead, you expand your product offering or your product footprint to really own their entire that entire technology space that you're serving. So, there's a bunch of great examples of that from IndieBio, but where companies have come in applying as a food company, but realizing their technology can be used for something fundamentally very different, and then they go on and raise a bunch of money because they hit traction in a very different problem space that they hadn't considered before. We've also had the opposite.
Yeah, can you give me an example? And then
so here's a good example.
Do you see companies raising money first, and then they have to pivot, and does that cause them a problem? Or what's the example of this really that sticks out?
All the time. And I think, one example, a really good example actually, of knowing your customer is XSTEM, which was in our very first class. They make mesenchymal stem cells and sell those to researchers. And they had a process that can make mesenchymal stem cells 300 times cheaper than the current method. And so it was kind of like, wow, okay, that's got to be a no-brainer. And so they built the technology and they went to go sell it. And when they went to go sell it, all the researchers told them the same thing. We really don't care what the price is because we're not paying for it. The government is through grants and things like that. So what the researchers cared about was actually something very different than what the problem they were trying to solve, right? And so the pivot was very fortuitous, which was in understanding their customer. They understood, they learned, and only because they went and talked to the researchers in their labs, they learned that, wow, the gender, the age, the race, ethnicity, all of those things were more important about the donor for those stem cells than the actual price of those stem cells. And so their technology, what it allowed them to do was actually harvest stem cells from patients at a much higher rate than others because they can store them at a cheaper cost. And so that ended up becoming the business, which was not to compete on price, but to compete on variety. And that knowledge only came from talking to the researchers in their labs. And there's just a lot of those examples of companies starting in one area and then ending up in another area that is slightly similar, but really a very different product. Another place is the business model. So you think you can solve a problem and you think people will pay you a lot of money for it, but especially in the world of healthcare, which is extremely complicated and multi-player industry, where you've got payers, buyers, patients, all these things. How do you create a sustainable business model out there? So we have this company called Mental Health, and Mental Health is matching cancer patients to clinical trials using AI and natural language processing. An interesting thing, when they came into IndieBio, we all expected the patients to pay for it, right? If you're a cancer patient and you can get matched to a clinical trial, that's got to be worth a few $100s to you, right? That was my assumption. Right. It turned out when they launched the product that it wasn't true. Patients, oncology cancer patients aren't used to paying for things like that. And so it was strange for them to go out to this third party and pay for something that didn't come from necessarily their doctor. And so the next question was, well, would the doctor pay for it? The doctor is certainly not going to pay for it because, in their mind, it's someone else's clinical trial. What's in it? There's nothing for them that makes it something they would pay for. And so that left a very strange place for Mendel, which was, now you've got an extremely valuable service that can help save lives and improve the process of making oncology treatments, and yet no one would pay for it, even though it's creating real value. Well, you have to follow the value chain, right? So one of the interesting things that happens with mental health is you get both genomic data i.e. a patient's genome and tumor sequence, but you also get their medical record, which is their phenotypic data, so who they are and all those things, all in one place. Those two things being in one place is very rare for a number of reasons. But when they're together, you can do what is called stratifying a patient, understanding exactly who they are and why they might be responding to a drug and why not they might be responding to a drug. And the pharma companies care very, very deeply about that. And so they will come in, and the business model finally being pharma became the payers, where they would come in and pay for that data so they could better stratify and conduct their clinical trials as well. And that's turned into a really great business for mental health.
Okay, it makes a lot of sense. I would bet you get hit with, a proliferation of ideas. Do you require applicants to first go through classes you have where they have to learn the process and, commit to going through it before you even look at them? Or are you not that selective up front?
No, what we look for up front is really what's the problem they're trying to solve, right? Is it a problem that could address 1 billion people or $1 billion? If that's true, then we understand, is this founding teams a team that can execute against the sort of technology or business problem that they're trying to solve? And then the third is really, can you make a business out of this? Is there someone willing to pay for the value that's being created? And then really the last one is all the nuts and bolts of, okay, you have to come to the accelerator for the duration of the time, which is 4.5 months. You have to be coachable, things like that. You have to be willing, you have to want to learn from someone else. Some people aren't, and that's fine, but it's not the right place to be a mindset for IndieBio. And so those are all the things that we really look at.
Do you have, how do you teach this process part? Is it formalized in a class or classes, or is it just, you hook up with a mentor at IndieBio and they shepherd you through the process? It's
more formal. And so what we do is we have a series of talks. We have a talk every week. We have a panel discussion every week. We have a board meeting every week. We have what's called a science roundtable and a business roundtable where teams can discuss with each other the problems they're facing both in science and in business and troubleshoot. And then the content follows a vague order of product development. So in the beginning, it's all about understanding your customer, and then understanding your product, and then understanding how product market fit, and then understanding problems of scale, adding team members, corporate culture, things like that, and then finally culminating in business model fit and making sure you have a scalable business by demo day. And that results in well over half of our companies getting funded for an average of about $2 million each company.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you give them your stamp of approval and they've gone through your incubation process, it sounds like it's a lot easier for them to get funding. Can you compare? You said your rate's about 50% success. What's the common rate without incubation?
30% or less. And so when I give that number, I'm also giving a more stringent number, which is companies that have raised over $500,000. If a company raises $50K, we're not going to call them raising money, although a lot of people do, because we're not interested in sort of adding numbers. We want to know that these companies have a real shot at success, as opposed to have an uncle that gave them some money, but no one else was convinced.
Right, gotcha. Okay. What's the process for getting into your incubator? Is it difficult? Is it a long application? Is there a cost?
It's kind of funny. It's one of those things that I'll say it's not difficult. We accept a very small percentage of our applications, around 2 to 3%. But really, it's always a struggle to fill the class for me. It feels like, in the sense that, it's easy if you have you've really thought about a problem that you're passionate about. You really have insight into that problem because you are passionate about it, and you understand how that problem could unlock a huge amount of human value. If you have those things and you have the technical capabilities to be able to make that solution happen, and of course that's going to happen across 2 to 3 people usually. What we're looking for is very rare. You got to really want to you got to really understand the problem deeply. You have to be passionate about that problem, and you have to have the technical ability to solve the problem. And if you can do those things, usually across 2 to 3 people, then we'll help you with the rest, right? And we can build that business together. But I think it's hard and it's rare to find those things together, But I think everyone should keep, you should always be trying. Like it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to think that for $250,000 now in biotech, you can build a viable company. And that's game changing for, I think, humanity in general, where we can solve issues of planetary health and human health in ways we've never really thought about before. And because the dollar amounts have come down, we can try things that everyone was too afraid to try, like hamburgers without cows, and filtering liquids with size rather than with shape rather than size. So it's just a lot of different types of things you can do, not just make different types of pharma drugs.
Right. And then last question or so, you mentioned a few projects. Any project or projects that really stand out at you as just being mind-blowing if they can get there?
Yeah, I mean, in one of our most recent classes, Prellis, is 3D printing human organs using lasers. And they've already demonstrated the ability to print a lymph node and that lymph node create antibodies when presented with an antigen, and they're working on microvascularization, which is preliminarily looking very strong. So, that's a world, if they're successful, our world will change in the sense that if you need a new organ, you'll walk into a hospital, they'll take a swab from your cheek, send it to Prellis, and then within a month, Prellis will have grown an organ that is from your own cells and quality tested it. They have run quality assurance on it, and then you go back into the hospital for the transplant. And that would be absolutely game-changing for every single person in the country on the list waiting for an organ.
Definitely. Okay. Well, very good. Well, Arvind, we're running up against the clock. What are some resources or suggestions for listeners that are interested in applying or learning about your existing startups? Where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, don't be shy. First, come to IndieBio.Co. That's our .co. That's our website. You'll get a bunch of information there, but I think really important. Just know that as a scientist, you could become an entrepreneur, and as an entrepreneur, you could find a scientist and together build a literally world-changing company through biology. It's the most powerful technology on the planet, and the market sizes for the problems are generally in the trillions, like human health and planetary health. And there's a lot of great change to be made and created through that technology. So use your imagination. I think a lot of people get locked into what they know as a technology, and so a hammer starts looking for nails, as the proverb goes. But really start thinking about what else, the problems that you see. How can your knowledge of biology and technology be leveraged into different problems that you're seeing in the world? And then I encourage you to apply to IndieBio. We're going to talk to you, and we're going to learn much more, and I'd love to work with you.
That's great. Arvind, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and thanks for the resources for listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I look forward to it.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.